So welcome everybody to our toy chat again this evening. Tonight I think we've got a great treat with, well, obviously a well-respected and well-known toy collector from Geneseo, New York, Doug Harke. He's also writes articles for Toy Farmer magazine. So he's a very knowledgeable collector, and tonight he's going to share with us a little bit about the background and the history and the products of the arcade toy company. So Doug, we'll turn it over to you and look forward to your presentation.
Okay, I hope I can maneuver through the right thing here. Now, I'm just going to cover the arcade cast iron farm toys. They made other toys. They made an extensive line of trucks and cars, and the farm toys were actually a smaller part of their manufacturing product line. The factory, arcade factory, was located in Freeport, Illinois. And for those of you who've been to Dyersville, Iowa, to the National and to other shows, remember it's on US Route 20. Well, if you go about 80 miles east of Dyersville on Route 20, you'll come to Freeport, Illinois, which is where the arcade factory is. In fact, the County Museum has quite a display of arcade toys. And Arcade published extensive catalogs, and this is the cover of their 1940 catalog. I think it's either the last one or their second last one. And this is my list of topics tonight. I'm going to go through in semi-chronological order here, their product line. The first tractor they made, probably the first toy tractor made in the United States, was this Avery. And this toy looks a little crude. It was about 4.5 inches long. And as far as I can tell, it came out between 1916 and 1918, the toy. Some of the books disagree with that. And here's an ad for it. You can send this in. Notice that it costs 25 cents in stamps or coin, and they will send it to you. That's including the postage. That actually comes from the Avery company, the tractor company. The second toy tractor they made was the Fordson F. And if you recall, most of the early gas tractors were monstrosities, modeled somewhat after the steam tractors. They were large, miniature locomotives, had a big frame. Well, Ford decided, this is Henry Ford, decided to get into the tractor business, and they had some revolutionary ideas. Instead of having a frame, the engine block here and the transmission case and the rear axle constituted the frame of the tractor. And this lightened the tractor and made it less expensive. And Henry Ford got into this big time. There was a price war, and he lowered his price down to, I think, $3.95 US, and ended up with about 80% of the gas tractor market by the early 20s, by about 1922. So Arcade decided to produce a model of this toy. And you can see, if you subscribe to this Farm Mechanics magazine for $1, they'd send you this free Fordson tractor toy. And this toy, you can see, has a lug rear wheel. Here's an ad for the same tractor with a smooth rear wheel. And because a lot of the homes in those days, this is early 1920s, had wooden floors, those lug tires probably did a number on mother's floor. So this smooth tired one was a welcome addition. This is the most popular of the Fordson tractors by Arcade. They were gray, they had a chrome driveway, they had red wheels, and this is the box. It's unusual to find boxes for these cast iron toys, but this is the box for this Fordson arcade toy. I must point out that Hubley and Dent and Kilgore also made Fordson toy tractors, but the arcade ones are the most numerous. They made them later on. They added other colors, and usually a Fordson with this is the version with the chrome driver, the large version, sells between $50 and $100 in the U.S. for a decent one. Well, these green ones are somewhat more scarce, and this one sold at the Geneseo auction about 2 or 3 years ago. It brought $225, so the rarity, I guess, shoots the price up. This is a page from the catalog, the arcade catalog, and you can see that they produced the Fordson tractor in 3 sizes. The 2 smaller sizes have cast-end drivers. As an implement, they made an Oliver plow, and it's a 2-bottom plow, which is appropriate for the horsepower of the Fordson. This is actually the real Oliver plow that Arcade made. This is an early version. I'll talk about the later version a little bit later. They also made an industrial version. The industrial version had W and K standing for Whitehead and Kales rims on them with solid rubber treads. And this is an ad from the arcade catalog. I didn't have a picture of an actual one. The most popular implement for the Fordson tractor were these wagons. And again, they came in 3 sizes. And these are fairly common, but finding one that's complete, quite often you can find the underbody or the running gear, but the sides of the box are gone. And so if you want one, you got to look around a little bit to find it. Turns out the smaller sizes are actually harder to find than the bigger sizes. Now, there were some problems with this Fordson tractor. As you know, Henry Ford was a fairly stubborn cuss. And at one time, when people wanted variations of his famous Model T car, he said you can get your favorite color as long as it's black. And because he wouldn't change, and there were some other problems with the Fordson, the competition, mainly the International Harvester and the McCormick Daring tractor, really ate his lunch. 2 of the problems with the Fordson tractor were it didn't have a power takeoff, and the other was that it had a worm drive differential, which created a lot of friction there and created a lot of heat. And people said it was a great tractor in winter because the heat would rise from the differential and warm your metal seat under you, but it wasn't so good in summer. Well, International used the same design that Fordson did. You see the engine block constitutes part of the frame, the transmission case another part, and the rear end. But International came standard with the PTO and other options, like it had, I think, another speed in the transmission, and you eventually could get lights as an addition. And this is an order form from 1925 that you could send in to order your, we call these 1020s. International actually started out with the 1530, and then they added the smaller 1020, which was a direct competitor to the Fordson F. And you could also get a red baby dump truck. And you notice the price here, $1 for the tractor and $1.25. And one of the early collectors was telling me that's about what people were paid for a day's wages at that time. So that was a rather expensive toy. This is an actual 1020 out of our collection. This is the early one. For the pulley, it just has a stub or a nub here. It doesn't have a movable pulley. When you grade cast iron toys, there's a different grading scale than for die cast toys. This is considered a mint cast iron toy. It's got good paint on it. And notice the highlights are in gold on this tractor. Those were hand painted at the arcade factory. They had a contingent of women who did the hand painting with the gold. The problem with the gold is kids would handle that tractor by grabbing it by the hood. They push and pull it and maneuver it, and their hands soon rubbed off a lot of the gold highlights on the tractor. So that's a 1925 version of the 1020, McCormick 10. Later on, they added a movable pulley. You can see, here's the red pulley, and in the background, you see the one with the nub there, the older one that I showed you first. And so this is probably about a 1930 model. In 1928, Arcade started putting decals on, or decals to Canadians. I keep forgetting that I grew up near Edmonton, and these were decals until I moved to the US. And the arcade toys from 1928 and later have an arcade decal at various places on the toy. So that's the later version. In the advertising, Arcade said you could also get the 1020 with smooth rear wheels. And we looked for 20 years. It took us 20 years of hunting to find a 1020 with smooth rear wheels. They also produced a industrial version of the 1020, and you can see it's got the W&K rims with the solid rubber tires. This is an early version in front with a stub pulley, and a later version with the movable pulley in the back. Those came out, I think, about 1926 or 1927. And then by the mid-30s, they were starting to put rubber tires on the tractors. And so this is a version of the 1020, probably about 34, 35, that had rubber tires on it. Again, not an easy one to find, as those early steel wheel lugged ones are. And then, if you recall, and Doug Vincent's probably the expert on this, they changed, International changed to red tractors and red crawlers, etc. in 1937. And so this represents a 1937 or so McCormick 1020 on rubber wheels, and it's got a movable pulley. This time it's chromed. And then towards the end of production in the mid to late 30s, they made them in various colors. And we call these the Christmas tractors. You've got a red body and green wheels. You've got a green body and red wheels. Again, these, you have to look around for these. They don't come out readily. And here are two blue versions, one with rubber wheels and one with the tread wheels, the grip wheels. This is an ad from 1926 that you could order these toys with. You can see here that the 1020 was $1, was still $1, but if you want the industrial version, it cost you $1.15, whereas the plow was only 50 cents. And by that time, they had a McCormick Daring Weber wagon with a team of horses, and that was $1.50. And that price was for both the wagon and the team of horses. And then the toy truck line was expanded. You could get a dump truck with cast iron wheels or with rubber tires. And then you could get one with an express body. I think that was a stake truck. And again, two variations of wheels. So the line had expanded even by a year after when the 1530 toy was first introduced. Here's an actual wagon. This is the McCormick Daring Weber wagon. And there were two main versions of these. This is what we call a lighter green. They also made a version with darker green color on it. And it came on a running gear. This box could be separated, taken off the running gear. In fact, I've seen log loads on the running gear. And the seat was removable also. In later production, they sold the wagon and the team of horses separately. So kids would buy a wagon and there were other implements pulled by the horses. So you only needed 1 or 2 teams of horses. This is the McCormick Plow. It says McCormick Daring, raised lettering. And this is the most common type of box that the arcade toys came in. It's difficult to find arcade boxes, especially ones in good condition like this, because remember that if this came out in the late 20s, you're looking at 90 years ago, 90 years old. There were two main versions of the McCormick Plow. You can see the one with the cream wheels in the back here. And there was also a version with the yellow wheels. Notice the yellow wheel one has an arcade decal on the back. This is the front or the end of the box, and the end of the box would specify the contents of the box, whereas the sides were somewhat generic. The end was specific to that toy. You can see the arcade emblem on the top of the box here. By about 1927 or 28, they made a threshing machine, and this was a smaller scale thresher than the tractor. The tractors were about 1/16 or 1/18 scale. The thresher was closer to about 1/25. And if you made it a full 1/16 scale, and if you've ever seen a Vindex John Deere thresher, you can see how big a 1/16 scale thresher is. And later on, if there's interest, I'll do a presentation on the remainder of the cast iron toys, which is Vindex and Hubley and the rest of them. So this was slightly undersized. The bundle feeder was pressed steel, so was the straw pipe, and this grain spout swivels out here. The kids had a lot of fun putting belts from the tractor onto the belts on the thresher. And later production, they took away a lot of these pulleys. They were a little plainer. By the late 20s, they also came out with a manure spreader, and this one is the earliest one. See, it's got automotive type steering, and look at this wire type tie rod. These actually steered better than some of the later versions. These beaters were gear driven. You'll see that in a later picture that I have. This was the second version of the spreader, and this one has a sheet metal tie rod here, and it didn't steer as well as that first one with the wire tie rod. And the last spreaders from about the mid-30s on were on rubber. And you can see here the elaborate gear mechanism was very well done, that the wheels drive the beaters. And these you could either hook a pole on here for a team of horses, or you could put a short stub on here to be pulled by a tractor. And here is a comparison of all three of the major spreaders. This is the first one I showed you. This is the second one, and this is the third one. By about 1928 or 29, they came out with a Farmall regular tractor. This was one of International Harvester's biggest contributions to the development of tractors, because these were a row crop tractor. This one's in pretty good condition. Still got most of the gold lettering on the bottom. It says McCormick Dairying Farmall, and it's got the arcade decal. And in contrast to the 1020, these had a painted driver with even flesh-colored face on it. And later on in the, by about 34, you could get a rubber-tired version on it. Notice that these had some chrome parts. There's actually a chrome hitch on the back, and there's the pulley on it. And starting in 37, you could get a red Farmall regular, like this one. I've seen a red Farmall regular on steel, and it's only one that I've ever seen. We don't have one of those in our collection, so they apparently are quite scarce. One of the other toys that they made, which doesn't come out in the international catalog, they made this scraper. And these scrapers were pulled by, this was made to be pulled by a tractor, and you had either a strong guy on the back handling these handles, or sometimes there was one man on each handle. And I can remember these scrapers when I was a kid. They were usually pulled by horses, and they'd excavate excavate basements back in the late 40s with these. They think that this bucket was actually made by Structo. Structo made a lot of pressed steel trucks, and Structo was also located in Freeport, Illinois. There's another version of this scraper which has a green box, and we don't have one of those yet. Still looking for one. By the early 30s, Arcade was trying to bring out some cheaper toys for the 5 and dime stores. They called them dime stores in Canada sometimes. Those were primarily Woolworths, Kresge, and Zellers. And they wanted to carry a cheaper line of toys, so they brought out these small threshers. And you notice the small threshers had the same straw spout and the same grain spout, but had a cast-in bundle feeder. And these came in green, red, yellow, and blue, the 4 colors. And I've forgotten which one is rarer than the others are. But again, those weren't in the McCormick or the International Harvester toy catalog. They were just for the toy market. One of the other popular toys they made was a cream separator. This is McCormick Daring cream separator. You see the engraving on raised lettering on the plate, and the handle actually turns, and you can move this stand around here. And if you remember, I remember from my young days, you poured the milk in the bowl up here, and ours was powered by an electric motor on the back. We had a McCormick Daring separator, and the pail was up high, held the cream, and then you put a 5-gallon bucket to catch the skim milk. And we used those a lot because we milked up to 40 cows and separated all the milk because we sold the cream. It was cheaper to keep the skim milk and feed a lot of calves with it. Here's a International Harvester toy catalog. This was sent to dealers in 1936. You can see the two steel wheel tractors are on top. And look at the wholesale price to dealers, 33 cents a piece. Or if you ordered a dozen, $3.60 or 30 cents a piece. And the rubber tired ones actually were the same price. I think one of the reasons also these were so cheap was shortly after the Depression. And here's the other rest of the line. Here's the 2-bottom plow. That was fairly cheap. That's why they seem to turn up more. And by 1936, you had to buy the wagon and the team of horses separately. And the same thing was true with the spreader. See, the implements cost a little more. The spreader cost a big price of 69 cents, and the thresher was 83 cents. Which is, again, a lot of money for those times. Here's the cream separator. The cream separator was 28 cents. And then these were the 3 McCormick trucks. They made more than this, but these were the 3 sold by the McCormick dealers, the International Harvester tractor dealers. And I think, I don't know my trucks as well, but I think these were called C-Series International trucks at this time. The big deal in 1937 was this crawler. This Arcade made this model of a TD40 crawler, which was actually a pretty big crawler. And the early models were on steel tracks. Look at, these were made together, made of segments, of actually sheet metal segments, and they really rolled on this. Later versions of this TD40 came on rubber tracks. That's a pretty big, heavy toy. One of the other toys that they made was this dump rake. This is actually modeled after McCormick dump rake, even though it doesn't say International Harvester or McCormick Daring, and it's not in their toy catalog. We generally attribute it to being a McCormick rake. And this is the big one. It's about 7.5 inches wide. They made a smaller version, which was 5 inches wide, and it was sold on the dime store market. They also made a double disc. This was for the later tractors, the more powerful tractors. And the front gang was fairly common, but getting the tandem disc with the back gang is a little more scarce. And this one's got pretty good paint. I think we went through 4 generations of these to get to one that's in this good a condition. The big news was in 1939, International leapfrogged the rest of the ag machinery business with their their new Farmall line of tractors, the M, the A, the H, and so forth, and the W4, W6, and W9s, and the TD6, TD9, TD14, TD18 crawlers. And Arcade brought this toy out in 1940. And you see they've got actually tractor style rear wheels, solid rubber rear wheels. And this tractor, this was a Farmall decal. Unfortunately, that's sort of rubbed off, but you can see the highlights of the tractor in gold. And this has got a chrome driver. These had chrome drivers on it. They actually made 3 sizes of Farmall M's. And these smaller sizes, the medium size and the small size, are actually much more scarce than the big size for some reason. And finding a red medium size one is really quite enough. That takes a lot of searching. The medium sizes came in 2 colors, basically, the green one and the red one. The green one is much more common. And you can tell that these were a late production because these have wooden wheels. Once the United States got into the war effort after Pearl Harbor, even actually before Pearl Harbor, they were supplying munitions to European countries. There was a shortage of rubber, and you couldn't get rubber for toy wheels anymore. And so that's when they started putting on these wooden wheels. And the small Farmall M's came in 3 sizes, 3 colors rather, the green, red, and blue ones. And these all had rubber, had wooden wheels, sorry. After World War II, there was another company, not Arcade, produced cast iron reproductions of the Farmall M. And some of my cast iron toy experts think they were probably made in northern Indiana somewhere in a foundry. If you've ever worked on these, the casting is much rougher. That decal is different than any decal. You can see a trace of the decal here on this Arcade one. This was a different decal. And notice the driver on this was cast aluminum. And people pay good prices because they want all the versions of this. And I'll show you another difference. If you look at the hitches, this is the Arcade version on the left here with the chrome U-shaped hitch, which is very common. It was also on the Farmall A and on the Farmall regular. There's the Arcade decal. This is the hitch on the other type of Farmall M. I've seen 3 different styles of hitches on these. I call a Mishawaka version Farmall M's. Arcade also made a Farmall A Cultivision. And this is actually a larger scale. They used the same wheels as they did for the Farmall M, but to make it look right, they had to make the tractor in a larger scale. It was closer to 1/12 scale. And this is sort of unique in that this is the original decal on top of the hood, the Cultivision Farmall A. Again, that's usually rubbed off by young drivers, young farmers maneuvering those around. And this is the crawler they made as part of this series. And you can see that these only came with rubber tracks. And there's a debate. These don't have a model number on them. The size of the engine looks like that's probably should be a TD14 crawler, but the fact that it's got 2 exhausts would make it a TD18 crawler. And so you can choose which one you want to call it. Arcade also made a line of Allis-Chalmers toys, and the first one they made was beginning in about 1936 or 37. And this is the Allis-Chalmers U tractor. See the engraved or raised Allis-Chalmers here. This is the orange version. That's the U tractor, the industrial tractor pulling a bottom dump. This tractor, because it was used in industrial applications, was made into the early 50s, so it was made a long time. It was made for almost 20 years. They made 3 versions of these Allis-Chalmers scrapers. Here's the big orange one I showed you previously, and there's the small one up here, the red and green one. And this one does not have Allis-Chalmers on the frame here. This they call this the medium size one. It's got Ellis Chalmers on the frame, but actually this tractor and bottom dump wagon are the same as this one. Those are just smaller wheels, so that's the way they got the medium one, is by putting smaller wheels on it. And actually the big one was also made in green and red. So there was really a fourth version of this Ellis Chalmers scraper. This is a rather rare toy. They took one of these U tractors and put a front end loader on it. And this never showed up in any of their catalogs, so it may have been a prototype, but a few of these have showed up in the market. So I don't know what else to say, whether it was real or just that somebody got the prototypes and got their hands on these prototypes. The most interesting and the most favorite of the Ellis Chalmers arcade tractors is this Ellis Chalmers WC. This has got the same type of wheels that the Farmall M had on it. It's got the decal or decal for on the frame here. There's the arcade decal right there inside on the axle. Just like another company duplicated the cast iron Farmall M after World War II, that same company also duplicated the WC. And again, you can see the cast aluminum driver. The wheel centers aren't painted. And of course, there are no other decals on it. I tried to buy one of these a couple summers ago, and they just, because everybody wants every variation, they really get into a bidding frenzy. They also made a smaller Ellis WC, and this is the early one. See, it's got Ellis Chalmers and raised letters on the frame here, an arcade decal. You can see it's a little bit smaller. It's got the cast-in driver. These came in 3 colors. I never saw any orange ones. The blue, the red, and the green. And notice this is a late production one. It's got the wooden wheels on it. And just about towards the end of production, they changed this WC. They took off the raised Ellis Chalmers on the frame, and they put a different driver. This is a larger driver, and he's got a larger hat. And in fact, this was used as a master by Fred Ertl Sr. when he started making cast aluminum toys in his basement in Dubuque, Iowa. The first tractor he actually made was an Ellis WC based upon this late model here. And his early ones had cast wheels. I'll talk about those in a later presentation if we want to do that. And here are the 3 colors of that late Ellis WC. And notice that for some reason this one came with rubber wheels. They must have found stock of rubber wheels someplace, because that's pretty unusual to have them come with the rubber wheels on them. These are definitely much more scarce than the other one with the raised Ellis Chalmers on the frame. Probably one of the favorite arcade toys is this John Deere A. And if you know the story of the style John Deere tractors were unstyled until 1938. And sometime between 1936 and 37, they hired Dreyfus. It was an industrial design firm based in Manhattan, New York City. And Dreyfus came out and styled a sheet metal for the John Deere A. And part of the way to promote this new John Deere was to make a toy John Deere A. So they released some information to arcade, and that's how they ended up with this this is a really good, this is actually a new in the box condition arcade A. We've gone through, I think, 4 or 5 generations to get one. This one was bought out of a household in Rochester. It belonged to a young lady, and her parents gave her this toy new, or an uncle gave it to her new in 1938 when they came out, and it was put in the closet, and it stayed in the closet. After she grew up, she ended up in the same home, married there, and died in that home. And so when they were cleaning out her estate, they found this mint tractor. There was no box with it at the time, but they found this mint tractor in the closet. This is the back view of the John Deere Arcade A, and you can see the arcade sticker there. You'll notice from the previous picture that I had, there's a red cap and a green cap, and you remember that most of the early John Deere two-cylinder tractors burned distillate or tractor fuel. So what they did is they started them on gasoline and warmed them up, and after they were warmed up, then they shifted to the heavy fuel. They sent a brochure out to John Deere dealers advertising this upcoming styled A, this Arcade A. This is the cover of it, the front of it. And this is the inside panel. And notice that these cost 45 cents dealer price. And you have to pay shipping extra. And this is the back of it. They stamped on this order form at 45 cents plus freight. This, as some of you know, I collect toy literature, and this was the most I've ever paid for a piece of toy literature. When I bought this arcade piece, it was featured in Gerard's auction about half a dozen years ago. And this is an order form from a John Deere dealer in Woolstock, Iowa. See, he ordered these, and for some reason he got them cheaper. Look at that, only 35 cents a piece. And postage, that was a pretty heavy package with a dozen of these tractors in. Postage was only 59 cents. And this is the box from an Arcade 8 tractor. And this is, we have this in our collection. We had some minor repairs done to this box. This has got the usual arcade graphics on the side. And you notice on the end it says John Deere Model A toy tractor. And actually, if you remember my column in Toy Farmer about 2 years ago, when I was covering John Deere boxes, there were actually three different boxes for the John Deere A. Arcade also made a cast iron running gear, and this is very well done. It's all cast iron except the wheels, and this is a steel hitch, pressed steel hitch. And this is automotive steering that actually works very, very well. And Strombecker, who's famous for making model airplane kits back in the early days, you bought these balsa kits and made model airplanes. They made a wooden box kit, and included in the kit was paint you could mix, glue you mixed with water. There were these decals in there, and then there were these supports here. And these boxes are the boxes containing these wooden kits. They still turn up from time to time, but this is an original one. You can tell the counterfeits because the wood's too smooth in most of the counterfeits. You can tell that wood is not too smooth, but remember, this was a 1938 or 39 kit. Arcade also made a line of Oliver tractors. And you notice that they used the same wheels as they did for the Alice WC and the Farmall M and A. And the green tractor, see, these had the chrome drivers, had fenders. And the green ones here, the green Oliver 70s, were sold by the Oliver dealers. The red ones were sold on the general toy market. And if you remember, this one was sold at the Geneseo auction just about 3 months ago, because we didn't have our show, we just had an online auction. This was one of the consignments. This is probably the best condition Arcade Oliver 70 I've ever seen. That's the large one with the chrome driver. They also made a smaller version, and again, it's got Oliver 70 on it. It matches the size of that medium-sized Farmall and the smaller Alice WCs, and they have the auburn blue and rubber rear tires on them. These turn up fairly regularly. I've never seen a green one of these. I don't know if they ever made one, but I've not run across one. One of the last toys that Arcade made was this Oliver Superior spreader. And in contrast to the McCormick spreaders, this one's a tractor spreader because it's only got 2 wheels. It hooks up to a tractor. And this cast iron cover here, you loosen these screws, and there's a nice system of gears that drives these beaters, just like they did on the McCormick spreaders. Because this was one of the last toys, they're pretty scarce. This is a bit of a scene with arcade toys. This is a little more played with, all green 70. This is a later Oliver plow that Arcade made. Usually Oliver was engraved on the shares here. This one also has a decal on it. And notice that this beam on this later version was longer than the earlier version I showed you at the beginning of this presentation. And then this was an adjustment crank that was cast in there. So it was a little different than the first one I showed. I think maybe there was also, you could also raise and lower the plow with that mechanism too, which wasn't on the early version. Also, I wanted to show that Arcade made a line of buildings, which are usually wooden buildings, but they made some cast iron ones. Look at that. You didn't want to drop that on your brother if you got angry with them when you were playing. It's got a pressed steel floor on it, but the walls on that good sized building are cast iron. One of the last toys that Arcade made was the Ford Ferguson 9N, the first of the Fergusons, or Ford Fergusons. Was that joint agreement between Harry Ferguson and Henry Ford. And these don't have the regular rear wheels that they used on the Arcade tractors. These have Auburn rear wheels for some reason. This tractor has fenders, and that plow is removable there, that mounted 2-bottom plow. That one is an extremely good condition one. That was sold as part of an estate by one of the people who wrote a very good book on cast iron toys. This other 9N toy shows up. These are usually red. They have no fenders, and they have the larger wheels. These were the rear tires used on the Farmalls and the Olivers and the Farmall M's and so forth. And that bottom dump wagon is very similar to the one that was behind the Al's Chalmers, except a little larger. And again, it had the large wheels on it. But sometimes this tractor turns up without the wagon in the back. They may have sold them on the toy market in various colors without fenders, without plows, without the bottom dump on it. One of the other lines of Arcade toys were cat crawlers. This was one of the last ones they made, the big one. And if you really want to get into collecting Arcade cat crawlers, they made between 30 and 50 variations. And 2 or 3 years ago, when Eldon Trum sold his collection, he had almost every variation, including all the colors, between models, colors, and sizes of the cat crawler. So that's a whole collection itself. And I don't have enough knowledge to give a presentation on that, but this one was sold at the Geneseo auction, I think 3 years ago. I think those are reproduction treads on that. That was quite a detailed toy, a big toy, heavy toy. Arcade also made a number of toys for the $5 and $1 market. And here's that small Oliver 70 tractor. And here are the smaller implements. There's the single disc, the drag harrow, the mower, and the planter. And these Arcade implements turn up fairly regularly. These are in unusually good condition. This set sold at the Geneseo auction 3 months ago, or 4 months ago. Arcade towards the end also made some other general market toys, general toy market. And you see here they took that McCormick Daring wagon. They didn't put a running gear underneath it anymore. They just cast on some ears on to put the axle through, and then they put to the bottom of the box, they fashioned a swing axle. And usually they had these roan horses on it. And notice that This box has a cast-in seat. It doesn't have a removable seat. So this was, these turn up fairly regularly. This is a later one with the cast wheel, with the rubber wheels on it. There's some, another common arcade toy is this Contractor's wagon, which actually they started making in 1910. And the early versions of that had steel wheels. The 1910 ones had steel wheels, not these rubber wheels. And usually they had for some reason, they had a white and a black horse. And a few of the McCormick teams were sold with white and black teams. And back about 15 years ago, they sold a set, one of the arcade, a spreader or a wagon with a mixed team like this, a black and white team. And they commented that I think Tom Cornwell said that was the only mixed team he had ever sold. Arcade also helped the stores market their toys. They had an extensive line of toys. And stores could buy this farm display. This was big. It says the background was 10 feet wide and 3 feet high, including this. And then you also got this base. It got some of their other generic things. 2 pumps, watering trough, wheelbarrow, 6 Holstein cows, 3 pigs, 4 horses. They did provide a Weber wagon, the Contractor's wagon. And if you wanted this windmill powered by an electric motor, you had to add $10. So if you bought the basic display, it was $32.50. The complete one was $22.50. And that was a lot of money in I think this one may go back as far as the late 20s, I think. So that was a lot of money for that. But if you were going to sell a lot of toys and you were a big store, you might spend that. And you could also buy an assortment of toys, and they'd give you this pyramid here that you could put the toys on. See, the smaller ones are on the top. The bigger ones are on the bottom. You see, there's a 1020 pulling a 2-bottom plow. There's the Ferguson tractor with the that wagon, that cast iron wagon. There's their road roller. You remember in the old days when they sold toys, and I'm sort of revealing my background here, but when I used to go into Woodward's in downtown Edmonton in their toy department, toys would be displayed out on the counters. And if you wanted a certain toy, you told the clerk, and the clerk reached down underneath the counter and pulled a box with a toy in it. They were not set out there for you to pick the toy up and take it to the cashier. So retailing has somewhat changed. Probably the best source and the most complete source of information for the arcade toys is this book. This is a soft cover book published by Al Oon. He's now deceased, I believe. It was about 1 inch thick. It was soft covered. He may have self-published it. It's called Arcade Toys, and most of it is ads and copy from arcade catalogs, but there are a lot of ads in there, and he's got some narrative in it also. What he does miss is a lot of the toys that were sold only by the dealers, like John Deere toys, until Earl had to get rid of those obsolete 2-cylinder toys, as I described in my column. In 1960, John Deere toys were only sold by John Deere dealers. That's why they never turned up in any of these catalogs or advertising. And so they don't turn up in Al's book here. And the other thing I want to note is that if you read the foreword to this book, he gives credit to Earl Terpstra. Earl Terpstra is a longtime farm toy collector who was a U.S. Department of Agriculture employee out in Minneapolis, or out in Minnesota. Grew up in the Grand Rapids area, Grand Rapids, Michigan area. And when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, he appointed Earl Butz, the Dean of Agriculture at Purdue University, which is my alma mater, as the Secretary of Agriculture, and he brought Earl in as his assistant. And so Earl moved to Washington, D.C. then. But Earl did all of the research work for Al, and if you read the forward, he collected all the materials within which Al then put together in this book. And Earl several years ago was inducted into the Farm Toy Hall of Fame. But Earl goes so far back as talking about thinking that they overpaid when they bought a new in the box Farmall 400 split rim. So that's how far back Earl goes. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I'm open for any questions you have.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. Wow, that was very impressive to see. And I'm sure that we have some questions from the audience. Not only was the presentation very professional and the photos were excellent, but my goodness, the toys are in mint pristine condition for the most part. So you can be very proud of what you've got there and what you've shared with your collection. So thank you so much for doing that. Do we have some questions for Doug? If so, just push the space bar on your computer and that'll toggle on your microphone.
I just, Doug,
Yes.
thank you so much. That was just super. Anyway, I have the question with regards to the steering mechanism on these tractors. Do they operate as they ought to? There's a wheel that turns?
None of them steer. The only one that could steer a little bit was the Farmall regular. You could just turn the front wheels by hand. The wheel didn't turn any of those.
Okay, thank you.
The first steerable toy tractor was probably the John Deere 60, made by Ertl in 1952. I think that was the first steerable tractor I can remember.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else got a question for Doug? I'm sure there are some.
Yeah, Doug, how come I was just wondering how come they used chrome on some of the tractors and some they didn't? Why they just didn't paint them a solid color? Any idea?
I don't know. I think I guess there was some attraction for these chrome drivers, because if you look at the toys, the arcade trucks and cars, they had chrome drivers in them also, and so did the Hubley tractor. The Hubley made a Fortune that had a chrome driver, and if you look at the Vindex drivers and the Vindex D and so forth, those were chrome too. For some reason, that was a big deal with toy manufacturers to make chrome drivers. It's just like putting drivers on toys. They did that until John Deere came out with the High Post B in 1949. That was one of the early toy tractors that didn't have a driver on it. Of course, the Lincolns never had drivers on them either.
Any other questions? I think I heard somebody else that was going to speak up.
Yeah, Doug.
Yes.
Two things. Were some of the early some of the early tractors, did they have a cast axle and then later they went to more of a steel frame axle? And my other question is regarding the do's and don'ts of repainting arcade toys or cast toys. Is it still generally accepted with cast iron collectors that unless there's a real good reason, you don't repaint cast iron toys? Your comments?
Okay, all of the axles I've seen on the arcade toys are cast in. Like the frames on the tractors, the actual pin itself that goes through there is steel pin, but the outer part of the axle is they're cast. Now when it comes to repairing and restoring cast iron toys, if you've got a toy that's obviously rusted and has almost no paint on it, you probably you can have that repainted. But you asked my advice on repainting an early international truck, and if you're going to paint it, I would use a professional service that can, like I recommended Iron Man Toys out in California. He paints them, and he'll paint that truck and it'll look like a nice mint truck that was made 90 years ago, instead of one that you put a glossy coat of tractor paint on it. These guys know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. And the other do's and don'ts is, unless you're very skilled at welding with MIG and TIG welding and all of these other things to keep the heat off from damaging the rest of the toy, send it to a pro like Arnie or Harrington to do it. They'll cost a little money. I know we paid up to $350 to have some Vindex toys repaired, but it was worth it.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Any other questions or comments?
Well, finding boxes is very difficult, and we are fortunate. We have some boxes for some of the McCormick toys. They're the best arcade boxes I've ever seen. They came from a fellow who ran an antique shop in a little town north of us, and for 20 years my friends tried to buy that stuff out of his collection, and he died, and then the state had an auction and I bought those at the estate.
Well, any other last minute questions from anyone or comments? No? Well, Doug, once again, thank you so much for an excellent presentation, very professional. The photos were excellent. The toys were mint condition. And my goodness, you've, I'm sure, impressed all of us with what you've shown us from your collection. Thank you so much for taking the time and the effort to share what you have and to elevate our knowledge of the arcade toys, I think, that we all know about, and many of us might aspire to have them, but likely our bank manager may not be in agreement. But thank you so much for sharing everything with us in such a great way.
I enjoyed it.